Thank you for coming this morning. We have a very exciting presentation. Very important to this time of year too, as we see some of our bird friends return from their winters in the South. Today we have Craig Thompson, retired Wisconsin DNR Chief of Program Integration for the Bureau of Natural Heritage Conservation. I learned from Craig just seconds ago, recently retired, so congratulations on that. The title of today's presentation is Putting the Kibosh on Extinction, the Power of Birds. And I'll hand it over to Craig. Thank you for being here.
Great. Well, thank you to Annie. I appreciate the introduction as well as the opportunity to speak to you this morning about birds, one of my absolute favorite topics. And as Annie has alluded to, it's a particularly exciting time of year because there are birds coming back from places that are much warmer than Wisconsin in the winter. So we'll talk a little bit about that this morning. But what I really want to do is give you an overview of what's going on in the world as manifested particularly by birds. And it relates to the environmental challenges that we as a civilization are literally facing. So we're talking about existential threats. I want to talk about that, why that's happening, but then come back to the things that we as individuals can do to help not only our birds, but the planet in general. And they're really wonderful opportunities. So a little bit of the sobering statistics at first, then we go into the more inspirational aspect of things. And peppered throughout the talk are a number of quizzes just to keep you on your toes. So it's not pass fail, it's just supposed to be fun. And so I'll let you know when a quiz comes up, and then we're going to rack your brain to see if you can get the answer. So with that, we'll get started. By the way, this is really informal, so if you have questions at any time during the presentation, just feel free to ask. So, putting the kibosh on extinction, the power of birds. Every year, the World Wildlife Fund produces a State of the Planet report. It's called the Living Planet Report. And in 2024, the report that literally came out last year, and this is an organization that's global in scope. They have conservationists and policy analysts working on every continent on behalf of wildlife across planet Earth. Every year they publish a report, and the report they published last year indicated that things aren't as well as we had hoped they would be. And in fact, what we know is about almost 75% of all vertebrate wildlife populations are in decline. What that means is there are 75% fewer elephants, 75% fewer giraffes, 75% fewer zebras, lions, orangutans, monkeys, all kinds of things are in steep decline. And it's really a manifestation of the extinction crisis that is underway across the planet. It turns out that birds are a visible proxy for what's going on across this planet in terms of the loss of wildlife. And we know, in fact, despite the fact that there are birds that we hear every spring, and we're hearing more singing. I was hearing new species, by the way, singing this morning, birds that are just arriving from the southern United States. And in fact, from as far away as Latin America, we know that birds are disappearing. And if we start to look at what's actually going on numerically, we have lost across North America about 3 billion birds since 1970. Now, in a way, this is ironically both a silent and an auditory crisis. So on one hand, we still hear birds, and everybody's thinking, oh, I hear birds, that's great. But on the other hand, the reality is we're hearing fewer birds every spring. How do we know that? We know that because biologists go across North America to specific spots every year. And they go out into the field and they listen and record all of the species that they hear and see. They've been doing that for more than 40 years now. And when they gather all that data, they take it back and they put it in big computers, and the computers churn away. And they say, this is how many birds of this species you found in that area. And we know over a period of time that there are simply fewer of most species of birds everywhere. So we know something is awry because birds are very powerful environmental barometers. They really respond rapidly to environmental change. For instance, if you have birds in your yard and you completely remove all the vegetation, likely most of the birds will disappear. Likewise, if you plant your yard full of vegetation, the good stuff, and we'll talk about what the good stuff is, you'll start to see more birds. So birds respond very rapidly to environmental change. And when we know we're losing species, that suggests that things are not well. So if we look according to specific groups and from a conservation perspective, we really need to understand what's going on in specific areas of the country to try to tease out what the drivers of loss are. Eastern forest birds, and by the way, Wisconsin is considered part of eastern North America. Upper Midwest by some folks' standards, flyover country by those folks on the east and west coast, but we're actually part of eastern North America. Eastern forest birds, scarlet tanagers, rose-breasted grosbeaks, and so on, have declined by almost 20%. And you can see the various categories of birds as you go to this direction. And it turns out our grassland birds, those birds that we love to listen to as we're driving through prairies and meadows, are experiencing extremely steep decline. This is an eastern meadowlark. It's a species when I was growing up, and I'm 66, when I was growing up, this bird was everywhere. You'd even see them in the interchanges of the interstate. And they're a lovely little bird in the blackbird family. They have a spectacular song. And they're one of the first species that returns from the southern United States to set up shop and have children, to breed, to have little baby birds in Wisconsin every spring. This group of birds is one of the hardest hit in terms of species loss, but this particular individual, this specific species has declined by 75%. There simply aren't the meadowlarks that there used to be. And one of the reasons is because of habitat loss. We know then that as we're losing vertebrate species, and it's not just the animals that we're losing plants. Just read an article that said 45% of the world's plants are threatened with extinction. There are massive die-offs of insects. So this is the stuff that I don't want to keep going because at some point I'll have to pass a box of Kleenex around because we'll all be going like this. But it's important to understand the magnitude and the gravity of the situation. This literally is an existential threat for all of us. And the reason it's a threat, we need species diversity in order to hold our ecosystems together. This planet is a compilation, it's a composition, it's an aggregation of ecosystems across the globe, all of which are functional in providing us what we refer to as ecosystem services: food, healthy soil, clean water, clean air. And the only way those ecosystems, the plants and animals in interaction, can provide and provision those resources that help keep us alive is by acting in concert with one another. Species diversity is essential to healthy ecosystems. As we start to lose species, this bird disappears, this bug is no longer around, this animal that used to be here is now gone. That starts to tug on the strings that hold our ecosystems together. And pretty soon our ecosystems start to unravel. And so we know it's in our vested interest now to ensure that we keep as many species as possible on the planet. Our very survival depends on it. We know, in fact, that all of the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that we have spent on conservation globally is quite simply insufficient. We are not getting the job done. And it's not for lack of trying. It's a function of scale. So we're very good at protecting critters in this national park or in this state park. But that only comprises a small fraction of all of the habitat that's out there on the planet. And so what we have to do is really work hard. All of us need to pitch in now to do the things that are going to make a difference for nature, for species diversity across the planet. We have to scale up. We are literally caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, we're doing all this conservation. On the other hand, it's insufficient. We're losing species, and the species are what we depend on for survival. So we've got to kind of reconfigure how we're doing things. And that's going to take involvement from everyone. What then is the future of nature? That's going to be up to us to decide. I happen to believe that birds are a powerful portal to conservation, that birds offer us the promise of hope in terms of turning things around. And they really provide an ideal avenue for connection for us to nature. Okay, first quiz. Okay, here's the question. This is a 1970s cartoon superhero. Now, these are all bird related, and because you can obviously see this as a bird, do you remember who this was? Oh my, who said that? You, sir, are a cartoon hero. Now, the question is, can you sing the theme song? Oh my God. Other people get super chicken right. I've never had anyone that can sing the theme song. I am so impressed. Thank you. So, okay, so we know there's a problem. We know it's serious. We know it's going to take all of us to pitch in. What I want to do now is provide some inspiration. A few examples of how individual species of birds and our connection to them have resulted in the most incredible things conservation-wise. So first, we're going to go to the tiny country of Ecuador, down in the northeast corner of South America. About the size of Colorado, Ecuador is considered to be a mega diverse country from a biological standpoint. So think of this little country, only the size of Colorado. All of North America has how many bird species? How many do you think? Anybody guess?
30,000.
I'm sorry?
30,000.
Nope, that's way too high. Oh, very good, Pat. 700. 700 or so bird species in North America. The little country of Ecuador has almost 2,000 species of birds. It's unbelievable. And so you can't go anywhere in Ecuador without bumping into good stuff. Well, it turns out that there's this very cool, am I going backwards? Okay, now we'll go this way. This is called a Hokotoko ant pitta. It's a group of birds that's found only in the New World tropics, and they're typically closely associated with forests. Now, this particular bird was discovered in 1997. It's about the size of a grapefruit. It hops along the forest floor. And its name, Hokotoko, is reflective of the bird's vocalization. So this is, and the locals simply called it the Hokotoko, but it was unknown to science until 1997 when it was discovered. And the discovery story is really fascinating. I don't have time to go into it, but suffice it to say, when it was discovered, the fellow who discovered it, completely blown away. But at the time that he literally discovered this bird, he could hear chainsaws whirring in the background. So here's this bird, it occurs in just this one little spot in Ecuador, previously unknown to science, immediately under threat from forest loss, immediately under threat. So he said, this is not going to do. We're going to do something to save this bird. Again, long story short, they create with friends and colleagues an organization called the Hokotoko Foundation. And the foundation has become one of the most significant and impactful conservation organizations. The Hokotoko Foundation has now protected about 300,000 acres of vitally important habitat across the tiny country of Ecuador. So each of these little symbols that you see, whether blue or red, that's an area that they have protected, all of which stemmed from the identification of this new species. They knew it was under threat, and so they said, we can't stop here. Ecuador has so many species, it's so important to global biodiversity, it's so important to help us hold ecosystems together that we're just gonna keep going. And it turns out that this is impactful for us because we have an awful lot of birds that spend the winter in Ecuador, an awful lot, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's the very first example of how a single discovery of a single species that was previously unknown to science has really sparked a conservation movement in a Latin American country that's quite important. Here's another example. Blue-eyed ground dove, thought to be extinct until 2016, when a young biologist in southern Brazil was out surveying an area, just looking for birds, and he heard this bird that he wasn't quite sure about. He went, I don't know what that is. So he recorded it on his phone, which is great, how convenient, and he went back and shared it with colleagues. They looked into archival records and said, oh my gosh, you've rediscovered the blue-eyed ground dove. Now what? Once again, a situation where a rare species is under a high degree of threat because of habitat loss. Well, they talked to the government, they talked to conservation organizations, and they literally created a new state park that's 70,000 acres in size, all to save this dove. Guaramirim State Park is in a very threatened area of Brazil called the Cerrado. It's a big, dry savanna, much of which is being very rapidly converted to soybean agriculture for the huge demand for soy, not only to feed cattle, but for us as well. And so all of these habitats, even in far-flung places like southern Brazil, are under a great deal of threat because of industrial agriculture. This discovery of this species, and by the way, there are only about 16 blue ground doves that remain on the planet. They're trying very hard to grow the population. This is the core area that will help do that, and that has spawned ancillary conservation actions that are now kind of rippling across this whole area. So once again, a species that was previously thought to be lost to science is now sparking conservation in a very important area. Okay, and so here's the last one. Anybody know what a wood thrush is? Yes, I see nodding heads. Has anybody heard one yet this year? Just maybe a little bit early. You've won? Maybe a hermit thrush? Yeah, I think it could have been a hermit thrush. They come back a little bit earlier. They winter in the southern United States. Well, this is Henry David Thoreau's favorite bird, and it's his favorite bird, was his favorite bird, because of its spectacular call. This bird has a rich, mellifluous call that just resonates throughout the forest every spring. It's just literally one of the great things of spring is to hear wood thrushes sing. In fact, I have a friend who has a wood thrush alarm clock. Well, and when it goes off in the morning, the wood thrush in his backyard comes rushing in and sings at his window very vigorously. This is a species that has declined by about 60%. And it's declined because you can see the red area in the eastern United States is where wood thrushes actually breed. And you can see Wisconsin up there. I can't reach up this high, but you can see Wisconsin is speckled with red. We have wood thrushes throughout the state. We're important for wood thrushes. But all of our wood thrushes, because they're very fragile birds, they're really tough and really fragile at the same time. They winter in southern Mexico all the way down into far western Panama. The highest concentration being the darkest blue areas. And so we know that this area right here in Belize and northern Guatemala and the southern Yucatan Peninsula is the highest concentration of wintering wood thrushes in the world. Well, guess what? Those forests are under enormous threat for all kinds of reasons, and they're being rapidly cleared, much of which is the result of the expansion of agriculture. And so concern for this bird has precipitated a project that's focused within this red circle. It's referred to as the Maya Forest area. So this is the lovely little country of Belize. Has anybody been there? Yeah, cool place. It's just really fun to visit Belize. Very heavily forested. They've got a very strong conservation ethic. And up in the northwest part of the country is the largest expanse of tropical forest north of the Amazon. It's unbelievably important, not only for all of the resident wildlife, and it's extremely rich. By the way, this is the highest density of jaguar in northern Latin America, occurs right there in that dark green mosaic. The Maya forest, in fact, was highly threatened. This avocado green that you see, the Maya forest protected area, that was all slated to be cleared for industrial agriculture, all of it. And it was only 5 years ago when a number of conservation organizations came together and said, this is perhaps the most important block of forest for wood thrushes in North America. We know wood thrushes are declining. We've got to save this forest. It was a big deal, but in a number of years, they were able to raise more than $60 million to protect this 260,000 acre forest, which is full of wood thrushes in the winter, and jaguars, and monkeys, and so on. So once again, birds play a critical role in terms of advancing conservation in a significant way. So why do we care about the tropics? Because more than half of North America's birds spend the winter in Costa Rica and Ecuador and Colombia and Mexico and so on. This is called a heat map, which basically shows the various densities of birds across Latin America. So you can see Wisconsin is cleverly colored yellow because of all the cheese we make. And half of our birds spend the winter here where it's dark maroon. That's where we have the highest number of birds. So when we in Wisconsin are trying to understand where in Latin America to work, oh my gosh, all these countries, all these needs, where do we go? We go to the dark maroon areas because that's where the highest number of Wisconsin species spend the winter. And we know that then we'll have a larger payback on our conservation investment. So just to give you an idea of how rapidly things are changing, this is the country of Nicaragua, important for a whole bunch of species from Wisconsin and North America in general, not to mention all the great stuff that lives there. Forest cover in Nicaragua in 1983, you can see most of the country is covered in forest. By 2000, that forest is shrinking. The projection for 2050 is rather dire. And what that means is our wood thrushes, our scarlet tanagers, our rose-breasted grosbeaks are all being squished into ever-diminishing areas of forest. And that's why we have to work both here in Wisconsin and North America and in Latin America to save these birds that have hemispheric ranges. Baltimore Oriole, great example. By the way, anybody seen one yet this year? Oh, you have an Oriole already? I am jealous. Good for you. When did it show up? And I suspect more birds with this big system that's coming in. There might be a huge influx of birds probably today, tonight especially, and later this week. First rose-breasted grosbeaks were at our feeders just a couple of days ago. So keep your eyes peeled for this guy. By the way, this lovely Baltimore Oriole, which is a really wonderful species that also has a beautiful call, is declining at almost 3% per year. Now that doesn't sound like a lot. That's pretty significant. And what that means is there are fewer Baltimore Orioles coming back every year. Can you imagine not hearing Baltimore Orioles in your yard? I can't. I think that's completely unacceptable, and we are all going to help do something about that. Now, second quiz, right? It's not what you think. This is really involved. This is high science. And we're really gonna test your brains now. Okay, so you know what bird this is. I'm sure you do. Okay, American robin, right? So all birds, most species of wildlife have common names. But in order for scientists to keep them all sorted out, because common names change depending on where you are. My grandma used to call goldfinches. Are you familiar with goldfinches? She used to call them wild canaries, which is fine. But a scientist isn't going to know what a wild canary is because there is actually a wild canary. So we have to name everything with scientific names, and they usually have two parts. A genus, we are Homo sapiens as people, so our genus is Homo, and the species name is sapiens. And each bird, and in fact, each of the 1.5 million species of critters which have been identified in the world have a scientific name. So for a robin, it's Turdus migratorius. So Turdus is the genus, migratorius is the specific epithet it's called. Okay, this one, you guys know this one? Yeah, I see nodding heads. This is one of the favorites, rose-breasted grosbeak. There we go, rose-breasted grosbeak. By the way, some people, because and this is one of these birds that winters in Latin America. They're just lovely. They have a song that sounds much like a robin, but it's a little faster, a little more energetic, not the pauses between the notes that the robins have. This is a tree dweller that winters in Latin America, readily come to sunflower seed feeders. They eat so much sunflower seed that people actually call them grocery beaks. So the scientific name for a grocery beak is Fucticus ludovicianus, right? So the point here is that every species has this two-part binomial. It's called a binomial, two names. So you know who this is. This is not the quiz. No, the quiz is queued up, all right? Okay, who is this? Okay, right, Tweety, very famous among cartoon heroes. Tweety's a great bird. And you know Tweety is crabby because of this. Yeah, Sylvester. He's a naughty, naughty kitty. He's always getting into trouble, always trying to eat Tweety. Now the question is, what is Sylvester's scientific name? What's the two-part name that helps scientists really know who they're talking about when someone is referring to Sylvester? Putty tat. I have it on good authority that science has decided that technically Sylvester is putty tat. By the way, that's going to be a very good question for you at a party next time you're there, a trivia question. So this fellow that's sitting in the chair in the middle of Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique is a guy by the name of E.O. Wilson, who was a prominent Harvard ecologist. And he was one of the world's great thinkers and had a profound impact on conservation as we know it today for lots of reasons. He wrote a book in 1986 called Biophilia. And his theory, the central premise of the book was that, in fact, biophilia is a condition that is in each of us. It is our innate connection to nature. We want to be in nature. We want to be connected to nature. We are, in fact, part of nature. And really, the reason things are going so haywire in the world is because we've gone to great pains to disconnect from nature. Nature's something outside, and we hold it at bay, and we keep it out of our yard, and we kill those moles, and we whack those bees, and so on. But in fact, we are consciously disassociating ourselves from nature, and that is the problem, because we are nature. And Wilson, in the beautifully written book, by the way, if you ever get a chance, it's called Biophilia. It's a great read. Says, no, we've got it all wrong. And in fact, he believes, as I do, that if we tap into this deep biophilia, which is found within us, that we can, in fact, begin to heal the planet by healing our relationship with nature. So, you know, in the end, we're one and the same, as evidenced by this Matsaginga girl in the Pato River in Peru. That little black-faced lion tamarin on her head is her pet monkey. And here she is bathing in the river with her little monkey on her head, and she's just one with nature at this point. This is the most beautiful picture. I just love it because it really speaks to our ability to connect in a way that's very unassuming, but very impactful. Now, we have had, by the way, very rare artist rendition of the first birders off to a festival. I can't tell you exactly what festival they're going to, maybe somewhere near Verona. But you can see that the fellow from Wisconsin has been in the lead for a long time. Wisconsin has a long, rich history of conservation, and particularly bird conservation. And it turns out that this connection to birds is a very powerful motivator for lots of reasons. I just looked the statistic up to make sure that I knew, but all of you are here because you have an interest in something. I mean, maybe it's just like, yeah, it's Monday, they go somewhere. But I suspect that all of you have a connection to birds in one form or another. And in fact, we all share that connection with more than 100 million people in the United States. There are at least 100 million people that in some fashion have some kind of connection to birds, whether it be bird feeding, casual watching, or in some circles, the maniacal people who really chase birds because they just love to look at them. And that's okay too. Everybody has a different type of connection. This happens to be at a bird festival at Black Swamp Bird Observatory in Ohio. And here's what happens at these festivals. So you get these aggregations of people who are very passionate about bird watching. And they go out in the field doing field trips every morning, probably sometimes in the afternoon. And if there's a good bird spotted, oh my gosh, everybody aggregates, everybody rushes to see the good bird in this instance. And what you end up with is something that I refer to as a birder flash mob. It's just this instantaneous aggregation of people, all of whom are kind of throwing elbows sometimes to see the birds. It's really quite exciting, but it is an exercise in patience as well. The point is that birds are powerful, powerful motivators. And if we take that motivation, that connection that we have, and we distill it down to where we are, let's focus on the fact that all conservation is local. It's really up to us here in the Driftless area, in La Crosse, to do conservation on behalf of our birds. We'll help the people in Latin America. We'll assist the people and provide support for the scientists and the conservationists in Texas. But it's really on us to make it happen right here. And there are a variety of ways that we can do that. That's such a great special effect. I always do it twice just because it's so cool. So the first thing you can do, and honestly, this is so fun, it's so easy, it is so profoundly important, is to make your yard a bird oasis. This is very easy. And the number one, the reason it's easy is because you just need to buy the plants and put them in the ground, make sure they get established, and then nature does the rest. And the response that you'll get, the butterflies, the birds, the frogs that you'll see in your yard, if you plant the right things, oh my gosh, you will be amazed. My wife and I used to live in the city of La Crosse near the university. We had a lot that was less than 2/10 of an acre. It was a postage stamp. It was this big. There's barely any yard around the house, but in a wonderful little neighborhood. And when we moved in, we planted everything we could in all of the open spaces. We planted service berries and gray dogwoods and asters and goldenrods and so on. And over a period of years, the response that we got from migrating birds and butterflies, by the way, was nothing short of astonishing. We saw the most amazing things because we built it, they came. You can all do likewise. And in fact, the situation is so significant in terms of habitat loss that it is essential that we all pitch in at this point. So go native. Here's the thing. Planting native species is literally the most important thing you can do. And if you do it right, and it's not hard to do it right, it can be spectacularly beautiful. Our yards, generally speaking, are filled with non-native ornamental trees, shrubs, and flowers. So without being judgmental, not asking anybody to raise their hands, but if you have cultivars of maples, if you have hydrangeas, if you have lilacs, if you have privets, if you have any of those species of trees and shrubs that aren't native to here, they look nice, but they're biologically inert. They are creating green deserts. And that's one of the problems we have, particularly in urban and suburban areas, is they're dominated by non-native vegetation. Our birds can't use them, our bugs can't use them. And so there they sit, basically ornaments, but non-functional ornaments. So to the extent that you can, I really encourage you to begin planting native species in your yard. and replace, to the extent that you can, the non-native species with native species. Here's a great example of why. Oaks, the whole family, man, they're important for wildlife. If you're gonna plant a tree that you want to be impactful for wildlife, make it an oak. Here's why. The 530 species, that refers to the number of butterflies and moths whose caterpillars eat oak leaves. A ginkgo, on the other hand, native to China, is a lovely tree. One species of caterpillar found on a ginkgo. I assert that this caterpillar was lost. It was actually looking for it. So when our birds come back this spring, and you can watch, they preferentially forage on oaks and hackberries and cottonwoods and native species. If they end up in a non-native tree, they go, looks right, but there's nothing to eat. We need to feed birds and other wildlife. The best way we can do that is by planting native vegetation. Everything in the world depends on insects. Insects are the little things that hold our systems together. And if we plant non-native vegetation, there's nothing for bugs to eat. If there are no bugs, there are no birds. If there are no bugs, plants don't get pollinated, and soon we start running out of plants. So you can start to see the cascading effects associated with the lack of native vegetation. So again, planting native vegetation is profoundly important as it relates not only to saving birds, but to hanging on to biodiversity in general. So, case in point, what's this? Yeah, it's the coolest little bird. They're just adorable. I love them. Black-capped chickadee. What does it have in its mouth?
Caterpillar.
A caterpillar, a yummy green caterpillar that it's going to take back and feed to the kids for breakfast. Mary and I put a nest box out in our yard a number of years ago. Now, this is when we were living over by the university. We put a nest box out in our yard. Chickadees moved in. I said, hip, hip, hooray. We're parents. We have chickadees. This is great. And I was expecting to see all these little chickadees in a few weeks jumping around the yard searching for things. Well, guess what? Out of that whole box, and chickadees usually lay clutches of 5 to 7 eggs, so they have a lot of babies that they have to feed. It's a high intensity endeavor. We raised one baby chickadee, just one, in a box that had not been attacked by predators, so the raccoons didn't get into it, we don't have snakes and so on. And I was very puzzled as to why that was happening. Why would we only have one chickadee? At the same time, we would have a catbird that moved into the other side of the yard. And we had this catbird for a number of, I don't know if it's the same catbird, but it was a catbird for a number of years. One baby, consistently, just one. Now, catbirds usually lay 4 to 5 eggs. And they actually need to fledge 3 to 4 young every year in order to maintain the local catbird population. But we're only getting one catbird. I didn't understand. Then I started to read about native vegetation, and it occurred to me. Our neighborhood was dominated by things from somewhere else. And there were no insects there, generally speaking, that would allow birds to find enough food to feed their young. So all of these young birds that were hatching were sadly starving to death because the parents, as hard as they were, simply couldn't find the food to feed their young. It takes between 7,000 and 9,000 caterpillars, 7,000 to 9,000 caterpillars over a 4-week period for a pair of chickadees to raise 4 babies. If you don't have native vegetation in your yard, they'll never find that many. And then they have to try to find other things. They try to feed them beetles, and beetles are hard and crunchy. It's like Doritos, you know? You don't want to feed them to your baby. They're yummy, but forget it. So once again, it speaks to the need to plant native vegetation. And not just things that grow caterpillars, but in this particular instance, plant vegetation that also bears fruit. This is a Philadelphia vireo. This is a bird that breeds in far northern boreal Canada and migrates through Wisconsin twice a year. They'll be coming back in about 3 weeks from Latin America, by the way. This species happens to be gorging on elderberries before it heads south back to Costa Rica for the winter. If you plant dogwoods and elderberries and serviceberries and the like in your yard, you will get birds, I promise you. It happens. I've seen it every single time. And so what we're doing in our yard now is trying to promote as much native vegetation as possible, including lots of fruit-bearing shrubs, to help those birds on their migratory journeys. These berries that the birds are sucking down have high amount of sugar and fat in them, and that's what they need to fuel their journeys to and from South and North America. So gray dogwood, one of my favorites, very tough little plant, easy to get. You can get them at nurseries. Now, when you go to a nursery, make sure you're getting the real deal, not a cultivar. Okay, so you don't want something that says autumn blaze or spectacular golden whatever. You just want, in this instance, and this is why scientific names are important, you want Cornus racemosa. By the way, don't forget to grab one of these on your way out. These are the 10 best trees and shrubs you can plant for birds. This is free. It's very helpful. So plant native vegetation. How many of you don't have to raise your hand, but I'll bet I'll see nodding heads. How many of you have had situations where you hit a terrible thunk on the glass? Yeah, rats, another bird died. Same for us. So we have treated all of our windows with something called Acopian bird savers. Now there are different kinds of window treatments that you can get. I will be happy to share additional information with you about that. But suffice it to say, this is one of the largest drivers of bird decline in North America. It is estimated that perhaps 1 billion birds a year die from window collisions. This is something that's completely under our control. These are paracords, these black cords that are hanging down, the kind of stuff that they use to attach parachutes to people who are crazy enough to jump out of planes. So you can buy a roll of paracord on Amazon for between $30 and $40. And I treated all of our windows with these. Our collisions have gone to almost zero. It's really been quite gratifying to see the response. We are now saving a lot of birds passively. And honestly, in terms of aesthetic impact, we had some folks that came up to the house one time and said, "Did you have an architect put those up?" No, but I'm glad you think so. And then we explain why we're doing it, and they go, "Oh, because almost everyone has birds dying on their windows. It's going to happen starting today and for the next 6 weeks and into summer. So please consider treating your windows. If you're a little hesitant, take that worst window, that one where most of the birds are hitting, and give it a treatment and see what you think. I think you'll be very happy with the result." And then finally, and this is a really fun one that we can all do every morning, good grounds for conservation. Literally, the best coffee is made in the shade. Now, there are 2 ways that coffee is grown in Latin America. One is in full sun. This looks like a corn plantation. The spectacular cloud forest that used to be there was cleared, planted in rows, marinated in pesticides and fertilizers. These are profoundly unhealthy environments, especially for the workers that go and pick the coffee by hand. The other way that coffee is grown is in the shade, under the canopy of trees. These plantations, these shade coffee plantations, are alive with wildlife. They're really rich. And in light of all the forest that's being cleared, they have become increasingly important as surrogate forests, not only for native species, but particularly for our migratory birds. So if you go into a shade coffee plantation in Costa Rica or Panama or Colombia, wow, you're going to see great stuff, including a lot of birds that spend the summer in Wisconsin. And all you need to do is just simply look for shade-grown coffee. Now, if you can't find it, and it's not always easy to find, the next best thing is organic coffee, because most organic coffee is grown in the shade. Not all, but most. And even if it's not, it's still organic, and that's still a really healthy way to grow food. In fact, the best way to grow food. So you can literally start every morning with a cup of conservation. How fun is that? And just think, next week, After you get your shade grown coffee and you brew a pot, you go, oh yeah, now I'm gonna have a cup of shade grown coffee and watch birds. That's the best. Uh-oh, okay, this is the final quiz question. I promise. So you know who this is? I know you know. And you know the Roadrunner's arch enemy. This fellow, yes. Wile E. Coyote, very crafty. Now, he's not caught the Roadrunner yet, but there's still time. Now, when Wile E. Coyote comes up with all of this crazy stuff that he uses, catapults and springs and dynamite and everything else, he shops at a single place, a certain vendor. Who is that vendor? Oh, you guys are too good. Yes. He always shops at Acme. And so in this instance, dehydrated boulders, just add water. I think these days, if he needed it right away, he'd probably sign up for Acme Prime, right? So in the end, it turns out that birds are good medicine. There are any number of studies that are coming out now that are proving the strong positive impacts of our exposure to nature, and birds particularly so. So they've actually wired people up. They've exposed them to bird songs in the morning, that beautiful dawn chorus as the sun's coming up. Oh my gosh, people calm down. There's less stress. They're just feeling better. And as they track them over a period of time, it appears that their health actually improves. The exposure to nature, because we are biophilic, because we are by extension nature, is really important. And so if we save birds, then we know that we're doing good things not only for the species themselves and helping to hold the planet together, but we're also really benefiting ourselves from a health perspective. Now, to that end, there are a number of us that have launched a new organization here in the Driftless area. By the way, anybody know what bird this is? Yeah, this is a beauty. It's a red-headed woodpecker. It's a species that's declined steeply across Wisconsin and elsewhere in the eastern United States. We've launched a local organization that we're calling Driftless Birds. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to accelerate conservation impact. So this is not a member organization, but we're going to be doing great things for birds. We've already started. We're doing native plantings at the Trempealeau Library, native plantings at the Cooley Region Humane Society. We're helping them convert their properties into little bird oases. We're going to be doing acoustic monitoring with private individuals. We'll be holding workshops on how to treat your windows and so on. We're very excited about Driftless Birds because it's focused on accelerating conservation of birds in the Driftless area. And the Driftless area is really, really important for birds. So if you'd like more information, I can give you a way to find out a little bit more about Driftless Birds. We would welcome your involvement. And by the way, this is a partner, not a member organization, as I had indicated, but we're interested in partnering with everybody. So if you have any ideas about how to improve things for birds in this area, let's chat. We'll get it figured out. We'll get something going. You know, in the end, it's all about us reconnecting to nature. And I think that the late, great Thomas Lovejoy, who actually coined the term biodiversity, put it best. He said, if you take care of birds, you take care of most of the big problems in the world. I believe that's true. All of us have a role to play, and goodness gracious, it's time for us to get involved so we can really have an enormous impact in very short order and keep the world full of birdsong. Thank you. So I'd be happy to take questions if you have them, and if not, thank you for taking time out of your Monday morning to participate. Yes.
But you talked about people who, well, not people, but cats that people let outside. And I see that in my neighborhood so much, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, so great, and I'm sorry, your name is? Barb? Yeah, so Barb said, what about the cats that people let outside? Yes, thank you, Barb. That cats, outdoor cats, it's really a supercharged issue emotionally, but outdoor cats have an enormous impact on birds. They are hardwired to be predators. They're really good at it. They're considered to be the second or third leading cause of bird decline because there are so many outdoor cats. They're killing 750 to 1.5 billion birds a year just because that's what cats do. The bottom line is, and thank you for bringing that up, the bottom line is keep your cats indoors. Better for wildlife, far better for your cat. People say they need to be outside. That's not true. Maybe they want to be out there, but when they're out there, they're killing things. So please keep your cats indoors. And if you can have a chat with your neighbors, if their cats are running around in your yard about the importance of doing that, that would be helpful as well. Pat,
You said don't buy cultivars for your yard. Can you say a little bit more about what the problem is?
so Pat, the question from Pat is explain the problem with cultivars. So the nursery industry is completely focused, okay, they're all about sales, I get that, they're completely focused on making things as showy as possible, right? So if you have a cultivar of an aster, it's going to have big flowers. And those big flowers are sometimes, they put so much energy into growing big flowers, there's very little nectar. And sometimes structurally, even bees can't get in them. My mom had these purple cone flowers, which were like this. They were crazy. And I gently say, Mom, you know, we should be going with native purple cone flowers. It was very difficult to get her to switch over. But what I was watching is bees, because these coneflower flowers were so big, you know, you'd look at them and go, whoa, that's a big flower. Well, guess what? The bees can't get in them because they've been so genetically modified that they're impenetrable to the bee tongue. They're trying to get down there and get that nectar and get that pollen. It's not working. And so most of the nursery cultivars are intended to be showy and by extension, less valuable for wildlife. In addition, a lot of them are bred to resist insect damage. So if you've got an insect eating a plant, oh my gosh, it's damaging the plant. Newsflash, that's what the bug is supposed to do. And that bug is probably going to get eaten by something else, which will ultimately be eaten by a bird. When I look for plants and I'm going out looking in the woods at trees, I'm looking for the trees that have the most leaf damage because those are the trees where the bugs are aggregated. And those are the trees that are going to support the most birds. If I see a basswood and its leaves are riddled with holes, I'm thinking, fantastic. There's all kinds of moths eating this. And they are in turn providing food for chickadees and red-eyed vireos and so on. So the reason they say stay away from cultivars is because they're bred for us and not for wildlife. So go with native species. Does that answer your question? Okay, hang on one sec, Dave. Bill?
This is kind of along the same lines, but I was wondering if you could talk about the butterfly bush, but there's always a bush that's a way to help the butterfly.
I'm sorry, the what now?
Butterfly bush?
Oh, butterfly bush. Yeah, thank you. So there's this really cool looking bush called butterfly bush. Budelia is the genus, part of the scientific name. And it gets these big gaudy flowers that hang down and everybody's going, oh, plant it for butterflies. It's great. Well, yeah, but not really. Because the butterflies feed on it. It's a prodigious nectar producer. They feed on it, but nothing else feeds on it. It's non-native. And so it's really easy to become confused about, well, they said it's good for butterflies, so I should plant it. But the bottom line is check and see if it's native. If it's not native, don't plant it. If it's native, put it in, and you're going to be astonished at the result. Does that answer your question, Bill? Thank you. Dave? They smell good. Do lilacs have any positive value? So look, I try hard not to be a garden Nazi because people want their yards to be beautiful. And I think first and foremost, that's really important. So if you had a big bunch of lilacs and they're really old and they're quite lovely, I wouldn't suggest you necessarily take them out, but plant around them. And as those lilacs peter out over time, start to put good stuff in. I have seen butterflies feeding on lilacs on occasion, and I've seen hummingbirds visit them, but I don't know how much nectar they're actually getting. A lot of critters come in and go, I'm going to try to get something out of this, but if they're not getting something out of it, then they're wasting their time and energy. So lilacs are lovely. They smell great. They're kind of part of our culture, but don't overdo it with the lilacs and start to shift to other things and let those lilacs just peter out over time. Thank you. Yes.
No, we have this old giant lilac, that's beside the home, but that's where my bird feeder is hanging, which is also by the sister meadow. Now, so when I was there, we were filming like that. And I did
Oh.
cooking bird feeder. And, put it, I drilled holes in some, siding, some kind of like siding, plastic piece, cut that up in siding and front of the window. You don't notice the strings, and it's really, really.
Good for you. There's a testimonial right there about the impact, the positive impact of treating your windows. Thank you for doing that and sharing. That's great. Yes.
In my yard, the biggest attraction for bugs and weeds is built by weed. They are covered with pollinators as soon as they start.
So you've already started to plant native species.
I do everything I can to get rid of that. And at least 20 and probably 30 birds all the time.
Wow, good for you.
And they nest in here.
Fantastic.
I'll have maybe a dozen different birds nesting.
Oh my God. Sounds like you're doing everything right and he had mentioned, what is your name? Tom had mentioned goldenrod and joe pie weed. Oh my gosh. And he said they're covered with pollinators, great plants. They're magnets for not only bugs, but birds as well. Thank you. That's great. Good work. Well, no, it's not goldenrod. It's ragweed. That's the allergy. So ragweed is a very different species of, yeah, it's a very different species of plant that I understand. And that somehow those two have become conflated over time. The goldenrods are the good plants. The ragweeds are the, I'm not going to say they're bad, but they can create problems just because of the pollen. So, yeah, so it's probably ragweeds that are going, giving me fits.
My daughter has 2 elderberry bushes, and we fight with the birds to get the elderberries.
Proof is in the pudding. Elderberries are magnets for birds. Absolutely. Service berries too. Yeah, I understand. Yes, sir.
The elderberry syrup.
That's because they're yummy. Yep. Yes, sir.
What are the birds that deal with emerald ash borers? What birds eat those?
A great question. Where are the birds to deal with emerald ash borers? So, will the birds eat those? Yes, but emerald ash borer is this little green bug from Asia that has killed almost all of the eastern North America's ash trees, and what are still living are soon to be dead because the bug continues to spread. There are so many, it's literally an infestation of a non-native species. The woodpeckers can't keep up. So there is no ability for them to control emerald ash borer in a meaningful way. So yeah, they can peck the little grubs out if they find them, but that's just ineffective because it's a part of the, it's a non-native species that's over here and it's just gone haywire. And so nobody can keep up, including all of the lethal control that we try to use in order to try to control the spread. It's just going to run its course and hopefully the trees will develop resistance over time, but there's no easy control for that, sadly. Good question, though. Yes, sir.
Same thing with Japanese beetles.
Oh. Yeah.
Non-native species of birds don't recognize them.
Yeah, Japanese beetles, oh my, yeah, they're a problem too, and they eat all kinds of good plants. So I'm not an entomologist. I don't know the most effective way to control Japanese beetles, but I know there are some really potent sprays out there, and I would not advocate for any of those because, gosh, those have such a terrible impact. So, in wetter years, Japanese beetles are not as abundant. We're starting out with a wet year because they like those dry soils. Their larvae do better. And so maybe, just maybe, we won't have a bad Japanese beetle year. Although I don't know what the best solution is for them, honestly.
I've seeded my yard with a bacillus that you can put in there that supposedly kills the larva. But All I've done is I've killed all of the Japanese beetles that are native in my yard, but my neighbor's yard, we live and even more.
Oh, you pushed them all to the neighbor. Yeah, it's pretty tough to control on your property and bacillus is a great way to do that. I guess my question would be, is the bacillus specific to that species of beetle or might it kill other native beetles as well?
In retrospect, to worry about.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. Yes,
We're going to, very, nursery and everyone. Where else? do we go?
okay, so where else do you get native plants? Great question. So Prairie Moon is a terrific business that specializes in native plants. They've got an amazing selection, really knowledgeable people. They're up in Winona. Another that's not close, but is still accessible is substantial expertise, great stock, and I've purchased from them myself, is Prairie Nursery out of Westfield, Wisconsin. Those are probably the two that have the greatest selection and the most expertise locally. Does anyone know of others?
The DNR gives away Wisconsin native plants every year. All you have to do is go on their website, order as many as you want.
That would be through our nurseries, I think, or probably their nurseries.
They'll send it. They have their own.
Yeah, so you can go on a Department of Natural Resources website. They have 3 nurseries across the state where they grow woody plants, but not the other kinds. So not goldenrods or asters or those sorts of things, but you can, and in fact, some of the counties have that as well, where you can buy native species very, very inexpensively. It's completely worth it to do that. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, yes, yeah.
Talk about bird feeders.
Talk about bird feeders. Do you have a specific question?
Well, I don't always think that people take enough care of the bird feeders to be continuous. You know, they'll buy some bird feed, put it in, and then a month from now, it sits there empty for 3-4 weeks. There's gotta be some consistency in order to make these birds stick around. So I don't know that it's really helpful.
Yeah, the question is bird feeding harming or helping? And that's a great question. And the conventional wisdom is bird feeding probably helps the local birds survive the winter. But as you astutely pointed out, there are real issues associated with making sure your feeders stay clean and the area stays hygienic. So if you're going to commit, you really got to be all in on keeping those feeders clean, keeping that area cleaned up, because those birds are pooping as they eat, and so the ground below it becomes saturated with bacteria, and so probably want to move the feeders periodically. But if you start, and so the big picture, it's thought that bird feeders probably don't have a lot of impact on continental populations of birds, but rather just local populations. But I think your point is, if you're going to do it right. Keep up with it, keep it clean, and for goodness sake, if you start feeding them in the winter, it can be a little bit of a problem to just suddenly cut them off in the middle of January. They'll probably go somewhere else and find food, but if they're used to coming in and feeding, that's probably a bit of a shock for you. Thank you. Okay, it's Monday morning. You've got the whole week ahead of you. Plant native species and bring it to the topic. Thank you.